Well, we'll go ahead and get started. No, thanks for coming. Tommy Joshua, Philly Peace Park. Christa Barfield, Farmer Jawn. No, thanks so much for being here as well. Yeah, really appreciate it. So, real quick, I'll start with, let me start with Christa. Talk about the work that you do, Farmer Jawn.
Farmer Jawn, Jawn,
That's
very
right.
Philly word.
Yeah.
I am.
We're trying to reclaim it.
Yeah, indeed.
These days. Yeah. Go ahead.
I am a healthcare professional turned farmer. I quit my job about 4 years ago in corporate healthcare and managing practices all over the city, and transitioned into farming. And now I focus on the reintroduction of agriculture into the lifestyles of urban people. By way of foodways, increasing foodways and increasing our presence, Black presence in foodways, and that's the way back to health. So really what I do now is a reincarnation of my healthcare career.
Yeah. Thank you, Christa. Appreciate that. What like prompted you real quick to get into that in the first place?
Yeah, so actually...
Was there a moment that happened?
Oh, there was certainly a moment. Like as I said, worked in healthcare. I, for a very long time, worked for some of the best doctors in the world and ended up being burnt out because of that. Transitioned out of that career, literally just quit my job out of nowhere one day, and decided that I was going to take a trip out of the country. And I went to the beautiful island of Martinique, where I had the opportunity to see Black people farming for the very first time without being under duress and doing it in a manner that was profitable and sustainable for them and their family. I wanted to come home and do the same thing, so I came home and researched agriculture, saw what it looked like in Philadelphia, saw the gaps and the holes, created a business plan, and Farmer Jawn was born.
You're filling those voids. Okay, good. No, thank you for that. John Solomon, Endangered Kind. Talk to us about, what is Endangered Kind? What's the meaning behind that?
So my name is John Solomon, founder, executive director of a local nonprofit organization called Endangered Kind. Endangered Kind was founded in 2016. We focus on violence intervention, and what that looks like is we target the violent 2%. They say that 80% of violent crimes are from 2% of the population in the city of Philadelphia. So we spend a lot of time on the ground building relationships with communities to target this small group that oftentimes is hard to target and find if you're not out in community building these relationships. From there, we strive to build credible relationships with these individuals because we have a relational approach with addressing gun violence. So we build these credible relationships with these individuals by spending time with them, by offering free experiences, whether it's activities, just different ways to bond with these individuals. We also, how can I say it? The long-term goal for us is to really have a relationship with these individuals to the point where we could eventually resolve conflict and mediate a conflict with them and groups that they might be going to war with. For those that don't know what going to war with, I mean people that they might be beefing with, because there's a lot of different groups. As we can see with the homicide count being high, there's a lot of different people across the city going to war with each other. So we try to strive to build these relationships with these individuals and get them the help they need, provide assessments to find out what exactly they need, because we can't diagnose a problem or just assume a person needs something without assessing these individuals. So we got a lot of strategic partners in the city, and we connect these individuals because oftentimes in the Black community, we feel like there's no resources, there's no opportunities, there's no jobs, there's no opportunities for entrepreneurship. So we find the resources for them, and we connect them to resources. And again, our long-term goal is to really be in a position where they're comfortable with stopping the conflict and the wars.
Real quick, John, like describe how you got into that work in the first place.
So I got involved in gun violence when I was 13 years old. Wasn't my plan. Had no intentions on getting involved in gun violence. I was going to school. My mom was doing the best she could to raise me. But I had, friends. Your selection of friends sometimes be the difference between you going on the wrong path and you going on the right path. And I had some friends who I felt like I had loyalty towards, or had to be loyal unto death, kind of like where we come from. So when I found my friends involved in gun violence, I found myself involved in gun violence because naturally you don't want to see people that you love dead. So found myself in gun violence, got shot when I was 15, shot my arm, went through my chest, watched my friend die in front of me the same year, literally bleeding right in front of me and died right in front of me. 17 years old, I got locked up for a firearm charge. Sent out placement for 10 months. I graduated because that was a goal of mine. Plus, my mom didn't play. So I made sure that I graduated. But I really didn't learn much in there as far as changing my life. So I came home and I found myself around the same people. That's normally your first downfall. And obviously the war still was going on, and I found myself right back into being involved in gun violence. I got locked up 4 months later for attempted murder. Got locked up on the scene, went on to spend about 5 years in prison. While in prison, really my spiritual life was the game changer for me, because when I first got locked up, I just got more violent. It went from knives to fighting. But about 2 years in, when I got upstate, I started going to church more. And that was really the thing that got me in tune with my spiritual life and looking at life from a different perspective and understanding, like, I had family that really cared for me, and they don't deserve to be suffering with me by coming up to visit, sending me money, and even having to go through that process of me being locked up. I eventually began working on myself, working on leadership skills. There were a number of lifers that's upstate prison. I know we don't hear about lifers oftentimes, but these individuals that had 30, 40 years in, they took time out to mentor me. They pushed me to read a lot more, and I began educating myself and being selective with the people that I surrounded myself with while in prison, because I felt like if I wanted to stay out of trouble and come home early, I had to be really selective with my friends up there. I wound up coming home after 5 years, and the same young people that I watched grow up, they were teenagers now, and they were involved in gun violence. And I was compelled to really get out into the community and be a person that I didn't have growing up, which is a positive male role model. And I started to develop a passion for it, and I found myself just thinking about ways to combat gun violence, and I wound up establishing my organization probably about 6 to 7 months later after being home.
Thanks for sharing that story. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that work. Thanks for that work. So, Tommy, we know a lot about, especially when you were describing the workshop, so we know a lot about what Philly Peace Park. Where is Philly Peace Park now, I mean, in kind of the grander scheme of things at this moment? How are you all evolving and shaping up?
Okay, we have just formed a Black-owned and Black-managed land trust. So we established Peacetown Commons Land Trust, and we just are going through the formalities now of placing the land and the properties that we are nonprofit own, transferring them over to the land trust, and we are about to enter into phase 2 of our STEM pavilion. So that's a $500,000 Black-designed, Black-built schoolhouse that is now being constructed at 22nd and Jefferson. So we good. We still fighting, and we still looking for other neighborhoods that we can help and assist.
So I'm hearing 3 themes that are being described here. Jawn, you're describing the power of relationships. That's what your organization does. Christa, rejuvenation, right? Rejuvenation through that food, through that nutrition, and Tommy, reclamation, right? Reclamation, and so all of that and power. So I want to, I'll go back to you, Christa, as far as like, we tend to underestimate the power of repairing like our space, the space we live in, repairing also the way we interact with that space. Talk about that like in terms of how important food security is, right? Because part of that rejuvenation is just people having total food security. We shouldn't be surprised that we have so much violence, like the violence like how Jawn described, right? We shouldn't be surprised that there's so much violence as there is in Philadelphia when there's so many people going hungry and eating the wrong, and when they do eat, eating the wrong foods. But go ahead.
Yeah, I think, I talk a lot about need, when I think about all of the issues that are happening in our city, especially gun violence, just overall poverty, housing dilemmas, and access to food, it just comes back to need. How can we fill those needs? What's the best way to get needs filled in communities? And I like to focus on, specifically with foodways, bringing healthy and farmed food, locally farmed food that's also farmed organically, closest to people as possible, because that was what makes it easier. I can't have farms all over the place and expect people, further away from the city and think people from the city are going to come to it. So until I have a distribution point, say, having a farm that is further away, maybe an hour away, that's much larger, and then have a distribution point with local grocers and stores, then that can help. But while at the stage we are now, focusing on growing food now, I have 5 acres in Elkins Park, opening multiple storefronts throughout the city is the way I know to be able to get it to the people that need it. And so I think a lot about these words, environmental freedom, and what that really means. And if we are free to be comfortable in our environments, that means that all of our needs are actually being met by the environment and from one to another. Us having that relationship that you spoke of as well is super important, and that's the only way, village mentality, going back to that mentality of how we all can take care of each other. If I'm a farmer and I can grow food or I can grow this certain item, then we can all make sure that that need is met, at least for our community. So it really just goes back to really becoming environmentally free as a people, but also as a city. Really looking at our space in Philadelphia, this is gorgeous. Like, think about where we're sitting right now. This is a privilege that many of us take for granted. And so it's just about, utilizing these resources in the best way.
And how high? The food insecurity is very high in Philadelphia too, right?
Indeed, yeah. Absolutely.
Like, how much of the population right now will be?
I don't actually have the percentages.
I think it's like, if I'm not, I think it's almost a quarter, right? There's almost a quarter of people in the city are what would be described as food insecure.
Yeah, so when I think about food insecurity, I take it a step further beyond what normal people would. Like, it's not just about having access to, any vegetables. Like, I am very much a regenerative organic farmer. I believe in that because that's what's best for people and planet. And that's the only way we're going to see real change when we're talking about environmental stability and real sustainability is only going to happen through us taking care of the land properly. And if we're taking care of the land properly, then automatically we're taking care of our bodies properly, and then the planet is better off.
Right. Planet's better off, in a more kind of localized context. Once again, it's less violence because fewer people hungry. Go ahead, Tommy Joshua. What's brilliant about what you're doing with the land reclamation, and then through that reclamation process, repairing, fixing, cleaning, greening the land, the vacant lots. And one of the things that I constantly cite this study because I don't think people in Philadelphia, especially in other places, hear it enough. Like, you saw the study, and this is where the power of the vacant lot comes in. You see a 30% drop in violent crime. Like, I do not get, and I'm going to keep saying it, I don't get why the city of Philadelphia, why elected leaders, why people claiming to lead us have not jumped on this opportunity. Like, if you say you're affected by the violence, if you say it's senseless, it's I don't understand it, and having press conferences and whatnot every day, then like, why wouldn't you jump on an opportunity like, okay, let's call Tommy Joshua, let's clean up all these vacant lots, let's knock out 30% of violent crime. But talk about that, how like that movement can really be a first big dramatic step. I mean, especially once you get people fed, then you can reclaim and you can fix the land too.
Yes, thank you, Charles. And I love your term, environmental freedom. The city, they're not going to call me because they know that if they call me and say, hey, Tommy, we want to get these lots, the next thing I'm going to say is that, okay, yeah, we want to own these lots. And that's something that the city power structure don't want to do. I'm from the school of Malcolm X. I believe that, the conditions that we face as African people here are by design. Nobody really wants to solve the problem of the black community because the powers that be want to maintain our communities as colonies. They want to maintain them as places of abstraction of wealth where they can concentrate poverty. But if we would take action ourselves, though, as a community, we can transform the situation. And to your question about reclamation of space is a prerequisite for us to be able to have safer communities. If we had actual control of our communities that was actually rooted in ownership, rooted in institutional ownership, when we direct our own culture, we direct our own values, you would see an end to a lot of the violence that's happening. So, just one thing that recently happened, I had a conversation with the white community, to be frank with you. A young man was murdered. I don't know if y'all heard about it. It was in Fairmount Park. The media was a tragic thing. And the media was saying, well, this was a random act of violence. The video showed a young boy walking up the street. He had his hoodie on, and he just pulled out his gun, and he shot the white young man to death for no reason. Now, and that shocked the city. But the point that I was making to the white folks who I was talking to at the time, I said, you can't have it both ways. You can't maintain the black community as a toxic dump, as a food desert, and as a graveyard full of frustrations, full of thwarted dreams, and think that it's not going to spill over to your community. Right? You can't have it both ways. So the only way that we all can be a better city, the only way that we can stop the violence, is we have to end a set of conditions that keep the black community as a colony. As simple as that. We have to stop that, and in order for that to happen, as Charles said, the city, other organizations need to work with groups like us on this stage, and then we need to go ahead collectively find a way out of it.
That's right. Jawn, I want you to weigh in. So, as working on a front line in the trenches organization like yours, right? And you've had that lived experience with violence. We normally, when we talk about violence prevention, one thing that I haven't noticed up until recently when we've been having those conversations on Word, we never talk about the environment as a potential solution, as the ultimate solution, fixing the environment, repairing it totally, completely as a solution to violence. I mean, how does that resonate with you? I'm just curious, and that's why I invited you, because I've watched your work, and we had you on a couple of times in the program, and I've always been impressed by it, and impressed by how you've described that work. But does that make sense, right? Does that connect with you?
So, I would say this, right? I don't believe that there's a singular solution to drastically reducing gun violence. But I do think because gun violence is a multifaceted problem, of course we need to think or create multifaceted solutions, including environmental justice. Because to me, you can't mention environmental justice without mentioning public safety, and you can't mention public safety without speaking about violence prevention. Obviously, our environment affects our psychology. When you have kids coming out to the community or just adults coming out to the community and it's lifeless, there's no green spaces. The buildings are, not up to par. All these different things weigh on you psychologically and make you have a low sense of self-worth when you're walking outside and there's no investment in the community. So I do believe that environmental justice is a huge part of the solution, because I do believe your environment influences your behavior. And if we can get our environments, where it needs to be at, whether that's food, whether that's more plant life, whatever it may be, I think that'll help a lot with impacting gun violence. But again, it can't just be a singular solution. It can't just be environmental justice. It has to be education. It has to be finances and economics. It has to be mental health issues, cognitive behavior therapy. All these different things are included when it comes to addressing this issue. And I just don't want us to ever limit ourselves to addressing this issue and feeling like one thing can solve everything. It's not, it's systemic. So when you're fighting against systemic issues, you have to use a multiple of things to address the solution, or address the problem, sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. Like that education piece you were just mentioning just now, like last time when you talked about how there was like a tipping point moment that you went through, like when you were reading, right? And when you have like the city, I just saw another statistic where 52% of adults in Philadelphia functionally illiterate. 52%. That's from federal. The feds, they generated that data. Over half of adults in the city functionally illiterate. 65% of Philadelphia public schools students cannot read. 65%. So of course, but like that education piece, that literacy piece is simple. Christa, so it's, how do we think so we have like the problem, the challenge in front of us in terms of just broken and dilapidated communities that we live in, that many of us live in or many of us grew up in, right? And then on top of that, we have like climate issues, climate crisis. And that does affect us, right? Like when it gets hot, it affects us the hardest. Like when you know, Tommy, right? Like especially in places like throughout North Philly, no trees, it's hot. It's like 20 degrees, sometimes 30 degrees hotter than, actually someone was showing me that it's 30 degrees, 20 to 30 degrees hotter in Philly, inside like deep places in North Philly than it is out in the suburbs. But but when you start hearing these elements come together, Christa, how does that future look? How does that future look if we do the relationships, the rejuvenation, and the reclamation? What does that future look like?
I really appreciate both the sentiments from my co-panelists, because when we think about colonies, and when we talk about ownership of land, I have a very different approach in my business, and it's because when we think about colonies, that means it's also necessary to decolonize. And if we're talking about decolonizing the outdoors, these public spaces, making them safe, it requires them to be decolonized. So, I love all the different growers and the different land lovers in our city. We are really blessed to have so many people who are doing amazing work. And what I get to focus on is taking spaces that are very much so colonized, where there are people that do not look like us, and I get to interject myself in those spaces because representation does matter. So at the same time, the work that you do is so important, because the spaces where it is mainly people that just look like us, we also need to be seen putting our hands in soil. So all of these things need to happen at the same time. And, one area in Kensington that's currently being gentrified is a space that I have a new building in, a new growing space that I'll be moving into next year, adding on to what we currently have. And that's the necessity of that, is to say that you will not have all white spaces. Right. There will be a space where there's a woman who is a farmer who can grow food and who will patronize this business and this brand and will help it grow. So that's what I think is important, is, we have to be in all the spaces. We have to be present.
Tommy, I want to get to this, thank you, Christa. I want to get to this conversation about young people, and, I was having this conversation on the train ride up, where, like, how do we get young people more engaged, more involved in issues like what we're discussing today? So it was like, well, maybe we just got to do more TikTok. I guess that's maybe one way of going about it, but it's not that simple, right? I mean, it's like what I saw. One thing that I noticed, I saw this on Twitter, speaking of social media, the other day from your Philly Peace Park page. You have photos of young people, young brothers, like they had shovels in hand, they had their gloves on, they were in the soil, they were actually doing that vacant, that vacant lot reclamation work. Talk about it, because that's what we were also saying. I was like, what? It's keeping these young people busy. It's actually having them do that work. But go ahead. Okay.
Well, thank you for that question. So the way I'll always like to frame it when it comes to young people, and I think I'm the oldest person on this panel. The young people, I'm like a young old head right now. So I always talk. I consider myself a young old head. I'm a young Baba. I'm an 80s baby,
I'm an 80s baby.
Okay, well, you make me feel better. Now, the older folks have better memories, and from memories come wisdom, right? From reflection and from experience. But young people got better eyes. They do. They have better eyes, meaning that they are very much in tune to what's going on right now, right? And the thing that I always caution young people, right? I said, don't be like me, don't be so arrogant. Because when I was younger, I thought I was gonna be younger forever. you know? And now I'm getting older, and I appreciate now my youth, and I appreciate my experience. What we have to do with our young people, though, is that we have to center them in everything that we do. So at the Peace Park, we center the young people. When they come on our land, we are like, what's up? How you doing? What you want to do? Right? And we trust them and we believe in them. Oftentimes, young people feel like their voices is suppressed. They feel like they never get a chance for the ball to be passed to them. So what we must do, we must start to develop predecessors. We must start to put young people in power, put them in charge, give them the keys sometime, and let them drive. This is how not only will they grow up to be leaders, but also we will get the benefit of what they have to contribute from their unique way of seeing things. But the youth is absolutely the future. We have to center them in everything that we do.
I'm actually, thank you for that. If anyone has a question, we want to limit those to questions because we only have about 20 minutes left or so. So feel free to walk up to the, I'm going to open up for questions while we still talk with our panel here, Tommy Joshua, Philly Peace Park, also Christa Barfield of Farmer Jawn, and John Solomon of Endangered. So the microphone is open in case anyone has a question for our panelists here. John, yeah, what is that? That's a big question, right? Because young people, like that's our future. That's really like our infrastructure, our true human resource. Like we have to make sure that our young people are taken care of. I mean, what's the formula for that, right? Like especially as we've created this intersection between violence prevention and reclaiming, fixing, repairing our spaces, the environment. What do you think?
I think we as a community, I include myself in that elders category. I'm 30, so I'm somewhere in the elders category. We've gotten comfortable with not engaging young people for a number of reasons. For one, I feel like a lot of our elders or a lot of older people have a lot of pride and arrogance as well, and sometimes that arrogance and pride doesn't really mix well with younger people that have arrogance and pride. I think we're hopeless, a lot of elders, a lot of older people, and I think we're fearful. And I think a combination of these things oftentimes prevents us from even engaging these young people to establish relationship. Like we have to, that has to be our priority for us as a community. We can't allow or expect young people to be out in the community raising themselves and us sitting on the sideline or hiding in the house or just doing things that adults would do and expect them not to be involved in tragic crimes like gun violence. Right. If we're not hands-on, if we're not a community like we once were, then we can expect them to be influenced by society. We got social media, we have music, and I listen to music. But I also know that a lot of younger people are vulnerable. They don't have, they struggle with finding their identity. So if they can't if we don't shape their identity, then society will shape their identity. Right. And what sells is young black people being involved in gun violence, being destructive. So I think we as a people, we need to stop being so comfortable and established with staying away from these younger people and start engaging these young people and building those relationships and having some level of humility and listening. Because we could come up with solutions and we could feel like we have all the wisdom, but they have other influence. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we got to have some type of compromise.
I appreciate that. Let me take a question from this gentleman right here.
Hi, Charles. Don't feel bad. I'm 30 also. Crystal, I have a question for you, but Tommy, you mentioned Malcolm X.
Yes.
The quote from Malcolm X that sticks in my head all the time is that there is no one more threatening to a black man that he will meet in his lifetime than a white liberal. So take that for whatever it's worth, but Crystal, you're mentioning your business model and you're acquiring property apparently. You talked about storefronts. In the African American community in this city, I'm noticing that there are a lot of young people getting into the food business. They're doing a lot of different things other than farming. There's farming going on for sure. Have you given any thought to connecting with them and setting up a co-op type of a distribution system where not only your products but their products could be included and sold from those sites, and especially in the communities that are food deserts?
Thank you for
Thanks
that
for that question.
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
There is a lot happening with Farmer Jawn right now. There's really big news that's coming very soon. One thing that I did this year was that I started the Black Agripreneur Cohort, where it was an application process, and I, took on 10 people who came to be trained by us. And not only when they come through my agripreneurship program, you don't just get trained for the technical skills of farming, but you leave with business skills as well. You understand how to start your business from scratch as a farmer, and you also understand what it is to create a value-added product, which is growing food and creating a product from that and getting it on a store shelf. So that's how I started my farm, is actually backwards, growing herbs first, creating that into a tea, and now we're sold in about 12 different stores in this region, and we're moving to New York and New Jersey regions the end of this fall. So the answer to your question is yes. The next step from that agripreneur program of teaching people how to be farmers, what I realized is that a lot of people have interest in farming, but when they get to it, they're like, oh. So I actually, of those 10, graduated 7 people that went through the entire program, and that's to be expected. What I realized is that there are some people that just need the ability to be able to create a product that they can put on a shelf. And so we're also stewarding communities around that to be able to help people to do that. So yes to your question. Thank you for that.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that you were the winner of this year's Level Up contest.
That's correct.
That's right.
Thank
I
you.
forgot about that. Yeah. So I do apologize, Christa. So finalist and then winner of the Level Up contest, this sister right here. You have a question? How are you doing?
Hi,
Good to see you.
my name is Dolores, and I don't have a question. I would like to say I'm thankful for all of you up here, but especially Christa, because the things that are coming into our supermarkets now are they're bad. And I have things here that are mummified, that can't, these are lemons that can't, buying food from the supermarket now is really, you don't know where to go to, get food, because when you get it, you go home with it and it's going bad already. We don't know whether this food is the food that's coming from these containers that they had when the pandemic was, and they're saying that, we are able to get the food out now. We don't know whether this food is that, and I have grandchildren and great-grandchildren that I want to feed, but I cannot see that, these things are mummified. How would they get that way? Unless they are gassed up. I mean, like I said, I want to thank for all of you.
Thank
No,
you.
thanks.
Thank
Oh,
you.
go ahead, John. Did you have something? Oh, okay. Oh, Christa, you want to respond?
So what I want to say to that is they're absolutely right. The majority of our food in the supermarkets comes from over 1,500 miles away. Transportation is what takes up a lot of the cost of the food as well. So growing food as close to us as possible means that it's also the best food that's for us. And this project that I'm working on that will be announced very soon is going to ensure that any big box store that would like to stock Farmer Jawn produce will be able to. However, there are powers that be that are much bigger than the shop right in your area, that they can't make those decisions even if they own it. That franchise, they can't make those decisions because it's bigger than them of where the food comes from that comes into that store. So it's about not reinventing the wheel, just creating these, taking spaces that we already have that are convenient for community to come to, and just saying, here, this is where you can get the regenerative organic food that you need for you and your family.
Yeah, are there any questions? Any other questions? Anyone else? We have a microphone that's open. We have about a little bit over 10 minutes left, so if you do have a question, or maybe a short comment, I'll give you time for a short comment like Ms. Dolores just now. Be happy to have that. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get ahead of this conversation and a lot of the planning that's going to be necessary in the world before us, right? And so, because typically when we have these conversations about, what's the future going to look like, the future of our societies, of like climate talking a lot about climate change. They don't include us in those discussions. They need to include us in those discussions. And so I'm trying to get ahead of that conversation as far as, right, Tommy, as far as like, well, just like what she was describing with, and what you were just saying, food coming from 1,500 miles away, and the powers that be wanting it that way, because that's a form of control. And that's why that decolonization is so important, right? And then when we look at the future, like, do we want that control, that level of control that they've been imposing on us? It's unsustainable. It's dangerous, it's destructive, and the future doesn't look bright if that control stays there, that external control. So, like, what do you think are the elements for us, like, having our self-control, right? Because getting ahead of this conversation allows us to be empowered, to gain a level of self-control, and to also avoid even more destabilization, because we keep calling this a violent crime wave. It's not. It's destabilization, it's social unrest. And people need to understand that it's structural and systemic, the stuff that's happened. That's not the excuse. People will say, oh, well, it's a person that pulled the trigger and personal responsibility. That's not like absolving people of that. But of course there are choices that are made in those moments, but it all starts with something structural and systemic. Tommy.
Yes. We must, and I'm talking about we as African people in America, we must go back and draw strength, insight from our Maroonage heritage. If you recall, Maroons were free African societies that were unique due to the fact of they were in inhospitable terrain. Oftentimes they were in the mountains, they were in the jungles, they were in the swamps, dismal swamps of North Carolina and Mississippi. We have to start conceiving what we are doing as a form of maroonage, meaning that we are carving out spaces where we can be environmentally free, where we can have peace, not gun violence, so that we can have control over our resources, so we can produce. Now, one of the things that the North Philly Peace Park or the Philly Peace Park is looking into, we have just completed a study of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and also we have completed a study of a particular law called the Municipality Act of Pennsylvania. Now, this is an interesting law. The Municipality Act of Pennsylvania, it allows for citizens to form a new town. So, for example, you may see something like the Parking Authority or the school district or the housing authority. These are organizations that have come into existence through this particular act. This particular act will allow us, for example, in North Philadelphia, to declare a good section of North Philadelphia as the Peacetown Special Service District. And within this district, the folks who would form the authority have the right to pass legislation. Any development that want to come through that particular area will have to go through the particular nonprofit entity, but also you can set up your own police force, right? Now, we're not talking about setting up a police force that's in the tradition or in the mode of the existing. We're talking about true peace officers. So ultimately, the future is going to look like us carving out and building new communities where we control the land, where we control the school district, where we control the security, and we control the food. So I want you all to look into that. The Municipality Act of Pennsylvania, study that. Let's build new black towns on new black ideas.
Speaking of that, I just saw, I was reading something in the news about just the other day about this man. It was a small town of about 40 people in Nevada, and they created what they called a micronation. He just claimed the land for himself. He just said, this is my, and he calls himself a dictator. He's a white guy. Also a dictator, and he's dressed up in all this dictator regalia. It's wild, and it was in the Business Insider magazine. Business Insider magazine was covering this dude, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting. You're gonna profile what seems like this nut, but he's serious, and the town of 40 people is serious along with him. He's like, well, we still have to abide by U.S. laws, but he's like, we do create our own sets of rules and regulations, and we have our own forms of currency inside. So that's it's not what you're saying, but people there's something happening, right? And we need to get along with that too. Jawn, talk about like when you're hearing that kind of vision, how people can be plugged, especially that 2% that you talked about, how that 2% that you were saying that causes or that is responsible for a lot of that violent crime, those hostilities that we see, can be plugged into that kind of future, that kind of framework. Because I see possibilities that are limitless as far as workforce development, as far as business ownership, as far as the innovation, the creation of, or the installation of a lot of the technology, and I just see so many different things that can be done. That keeps not only that population, that segment of the population occupied and reformed, but also compensated as well. So I'd like to hear more from what you think.
I think we oftentimes we talk about this 2% or younger people that's involved in gun violence, being at the table and having these conversations. As we see, the city of Philadelphia is becoming a new city of Philadelphia. There's a lot of investment in the city that's already happened, a lot of plans that have already been made, and before we can even talk about getting these individuals to the table, we need the Black community to want to be at the table. And we're not seeing a lot of that. A lot of these people are having these conversations, and maybe you might have a few of us in these rooms, but us as a people, we need to get informed and educated on what's going on in the city, because there's a lot going on right now. Everywhere you go at, communities are being gentrified. Everywhere I drive at, I see new property, new development. And if we as a people, first and foremost, don't feel entitled to be at that table to hear those conversations, to actually give input on those conversations, I mean, reaching out to the 2% is meaningless, because our people as a collective are not even inspired or feel like they need to be at those tables. So I hope I answered your question.
You did. Go ahead,
agree.
Christa.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000%. When we talking about, goes back to the decolonizing again. In order to really do that, for ownership of land, there's responsibility that comes with that. And then to create these co-ops and collectives, we have to be very careful that we're not creating a different society of Black people that are in the know, that have understanding. And then we have our other brothers and sisters that are out here on the outside, because then we're just recreating the problem. That
was the first mistake we made, right?
Absolutely.
It was like the talented 10th.
It's so true.
And we don't want to make that same mistake twice, right? Go ahead.
It's very possible to do that all over again. So it's like that's why simultaneously we have to do all the things, and it becomes very laborious. And so when I realized the reason why we are a multi-location farm is because I know that the work can't be done in one spot. And the reason why I created the agripreneur cohort is because I can't do all the things. All I can do is teach my philosophy to other people so that they can go out into the world and do more. And so that's to me is the focus. But we have so much trauma that we have to work through. So before I can hand a parcel of land to someone to know that they're going to shepherd that properly and it's going to be a communal space for all, I have to make sure that that person is up for the task of what that really means. Because without decolonizing and recolonizing again.
The point we're trying to make here too is that, like, how can we expect to end this crisis, eliminate the violence, if like we have no control over? We're constantly being traumatized in the spaces that we're living in, right? That we're constantly seeing all this like destruction and disrepair and trash, no trees, limited means, limited access to food. How can we expect all that? What are some elements, however, some pieces where you think, Tommy, in this conversation that you think we're missing?
Well, I think that here in Philly, we must see all of our efforts as part of a common movement, right? As a common movement. And I hope to follow up and sit down with my colleagues right here, pit our heads together, and bring other people who agree with us or who thinking like us. So that's number one. Number one, we must unite those that's working in green space with educators, with anti-violence advocates, with healers, right? That's the 4 constituents that we must unite. and we must see ourselves as an overall movement. And I stress a big thing about Sankofa, right? Looking back, drawing strength from the back in order to inform our future, right? So, in conclusion, though, on this point, each and every one of us that's here today has the power to make a revolution happen in their neighborhood. The easiest revolution that can happen is us going outside of our house, getting a broom, getting a trash bag, going to the kitchen and turning that hot water on, let that hot water run until it's smoking, fill up that bucket, that's old school. Take that bucket, splash that water down, right? Sweep up, clean up, let people see that. That's the most powerful education, and it's the most powerful communication that you can give. Because what you're saying is, I care, I give a, I am proud of where I live at, right? And then get to the vacant land. Get to the vacant land. Get to Farmer John's store. Holler at this young brother right here and bring him to your neighborhood and link him up with your nephews, with your uncles, with your little brothers. That's what it's going to take, us seeing ourselves as part of one movement that's very diverse and that's very effective, working towards one common goal.
Yeah, that's what, it's more than 500,000 black people in the city of Philadelphia. So imagine that multiplied 500,000, over 500,000 times, or 600,000 times. John, we have an election coming up too. And so like, what I'm not hearing from any of the folks that resigned from city council to, announce or start their intentions to run for mayor, the person to lead this city, I've not heard any elements of the conversation we've had for the past 4 hours here at Bartram's Garden. If I don't hear that conversation, if they're not hearing that conversation, the people on Word TV are not hearing it or hearing on Word Radio, I don't think those are the right people to be leading the city. I really don't. I believe that. One of the people who's running from, I don't understand how this person could sanely conceive themselves as running City Hall when they, for so many years, represented one of the dirtiest, filthiest, trashiest sections of the city of Philadelphia. I don't know where she's got it in her head that, oh, wow, I can, after presiding over this filthy, trifling space, I can run the city. I can run the whole city like this. This next election is going to be huge. There are people thinking that they should be elected who should not be anywhere near another elected seat in City Hall. I mean that. How big is that election for you? Let's finish up on that note, because I think that could be a pivotal moment where this conversation right here, we take that to the next stage, the next level, and let people know, hey, if you want to lead this city, this is the conversation you had. This is the plan that you need to roll out now. Go ahead, John.
It's still, honestly, there's still a lot that I need to learn about each candidate. I've watched some of them over the years, but I'm not really sold on any particular person right now. So for me, obviously, environmental justice is a conversation that needs to be had. And public safety and violence prevention is a conversation that needs to be had, but I don't really have a particular person in mind that I feel like...
You don't need to endorse anyone. Sorry. I just was wondering that conversation.
I do think it's important, though. This election is very important. Anytime you have a person running for mayor, that's a big deal, because that can shift the whole entire city.
What do you think, Christa? This could be a pivotal point. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say that all the work that I've done over these last 5 years has not been with the assistance of elected officials. So I believe that making things happen, you just gotta do it. And it's not to say that I don't have friends or colleagues, essentially people that know me, that I now know because of my work. But I will say that, I didn't get any I wasn't recognized by any elected official until I did all the things. I grind, I have grit, I did all the work, and then people showed to my press conference. That's kind of how that works.
To put in that work, and you also turn maximum voter turnout, right? That's the way they respond. So go ahead, Tommy.
Yeah, and I co-sign what she's saying. Let it go on record that no elected official, I'm from North Philly, y'all know who represent the 2-1 area code, who's the state representative and who's the council president representing my neighborhood. We have got zero support over 10 years. I have met multiple times with representatives of the city council president. I have sat for hours, and I give the state representative credit. She was an excellent listener as I poured out and told her about our plan to develop green space in the community. We have got zero support. We haven't got a red dime. We haven't got a phone call. We haven't got anything. And I want to warn the elected officials, someone like myself who is very active in my community, and my influence inside my community is growing by the day. I will tell my people, do not vote for you. I will tell them, the people that's under my influence, I will tell them the truth. I would tell them, do not vote for them. And I would do my best to create the conditions that we can truly develop new people representatives who are not neo-colonialists, who are not Uncle Toms, who are not selling out Black Philadelphia day and night. It's a disgrace what's happening politically in this city. So I encourage young folks, run for office. Run for office. Let's get the bums out.
Because I don't understand how no one's calling you back, how no one's responding or trying to invest in that. Like, once again, you do what he's doing, reclaim, clean, green, grow food in all these vacant lots. That's a 30% drop in. That's an immediate 30% drop in violent crime. So I don't understand what's the problem. Why would people need to start asking, when you get around your city council members, you get around your mayor, you get around your state reps, and ask them that. Start asking them that. Don't ask them. I'm sorry, Ms. Lynn, we ran out of time, so I just noticed you were there.
It's real
Oh,
quick,
real quick, go ahead.
Real quick. On Solomon's show this morning, he was saying how TikTok is out to get young people more involved in this election because it's very important, as you said. And they were saying, if you don't register to vote or vote, you ain't getting nothing. I mean, we got to come up with something, whatever works. And I also want to suggest, Andrea did an excellent show on Reverend Leon Sullivan's principles. I think we should put more of that into action.
Yeah, we should. We should. That's the game plan right there. Thank you, Ms. Lynn from Upper Darby. I appreciate you. Tommy Joshua, let me stop. We actually have to wrap up so we can go to Andrea. Tommy Joshua, Philly Peace Park. Christa Barfield of Farmer Jawn, and John Solomon of Endangered. Round of applause.